Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the duo of Wailord and Diglett. Now, the reason for this pairing is because Wailord is the biggest Pokemon up until this point at 47 feet 7 inches, and Diglett is the smallest Pokemon at 8 inches. Well, actually, it's tied for the smallest with Natu and Azurill, but Diglett makes for a better foil to Wailord, so I think it's the best choice overall. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to Wailord, who has 170 HP, 90 attack, 45 defense, 90 special attack, 45 special defense, and 60 speed, and gets access to mostly normal water and ice type moves, but it also gets access to rollout, which could be very helpful for the final fight, and with 90 base attack, it will be just as strong as its special moves, and with a 170 base HP stat, it should be really hard to take off the field. Now, it does only have 60 speed, which isn't great, but it should be good enough because we have our Diglett, which has 10 HP, 55 attack, 25 defense, 35 special attack, 45 special defense, and 95 speed, and gets access to mostly normal and ground type moves, as well as Aerial Ace, which seems kind of strange, but at least it's going to be able to get the jump on a lot of opponents, and that's where I think it's definitely going to shine, because while it's not as good at dealing damage, it could definitely be a nuisance, especially in the late game with 95 base speed. And in stark contrast to Wailord's 170 HP, Diglett only has 10, so it is extremely frail, but hopefully the speed will make the difference. Anyway, moving on to our Wailord in particular, it has a mild nature, raising its special attack but lowering its defense, which I think is honestly fine because it has a low defense already, and I think that the extra power on its special moves are going to be more helpful overall. Anyway, with that, it has the Oblivious ability, which prevents attraction. It could also have had Water Veil, which prevents being burnt, but I flipped a coin because they're both kind of useful throughout this game, and I got Oblivious. And according to Bulbapedia, it gets Splash, Growl, Water Gun, and Rollout by level 10. Moving on to our Diglett, who has a serious nature. Unfortunately, it is just a neutral nature, but that's alright. It gets access to the Sand Veil ability, which ups its evasion in a Sandstorm. Unfortunately, there's no Sandstorm TM, so it's not able to set this up. It also could have gotten the Arena Trap ability, which prevents the opponent from switching Pokemon, but no trainer actually switches Pokemon, so it's not that great. And according to Bulbapedia, it gets Scratch, Sand Attack, Growl, and Magnitude by level 10. Anyway, moving on to the battle against the Old Man, as you might expect, we didn't really have too much trouble getting to this point because Wailord is a fully evolved Pokemon with a pretty decent special attack and attack stat and a ton of HP. While Diglett did struggle a little just because of how frail it is, it certainly is no pushover because it has Magnitude, a move that rolls a number between 4 and 10 to figure out its base power, with 4 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, so 9 is very strong, and in fact a crit takes down Wailord from half health, which isn't great, and Diglett's left on 1 HP. I only need a scratch or two to take it down, but unfortunately I get poisoned, and Absorb finishes me off. Okay, well let's try that again, but this time I don't get a crit on Wailord, and I'm able to finish him off pretty easily. Anyway, moving on to the battle against the Power Rangers, I decided to choose Red today because I have super effective damage against both of his Pokemon. Unfortunately, Magnitude 5 is very weak, not even doing half to Slugma and doing very little to Houndour. Water Gun isn't quite enough to take down Houndour, but because I do outspeed, I know I can take it down this turn with another Magnitude, and Magnitude 7 is good enough to take down both of them. So I go inside the building, and at level 17 I get the move Dig, which I teach over a Growl, and I run into a Wailmer. Hello Wailmer, goodbye Wailmer. And then I go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly. I go for Rollout on the first turn into the Love Disc, and that's because I want to build his power as high as I can. I know Love Disc can't really do any damage to me, unlike Beautifly, but Beautifly also doesn't do that much either. Go for Dig to bring Love Disc down to about half. Another Rollout finishes it off, and now I'm at a stage 3 rollout for the next Pokemon coming out. I decide to teach Astonish over Splash. Out comes Roselia, and I need to take this down in a single hit, otherwise I will be in trouble. I go for Sand Attack and the Beautifly so it can't hit nearly as often, and Roselia does go down to a single rollout, which is very nice. Then out comes her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Unfortunately, Diglett does go down, so Wailord is just going to have to take them both down. Delcatty survives on a sliver, but another rollout will finish it off, and then all that's left is the Beautifly. So one more rollout should do the trick, and I beat Laverne on the first attempt. Anyway, of course you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror Bee. Well, how you doing on this fine day, Mirror Bee? Well, it's always good to see you. Anyway, at level 28, Wailord gets Water Pulse, which I teach over Water Gun, and at the Real Game Tower I pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. And I go ahead and pick up the TM for Blizzard as well, just in case I need the spread damage for later. And I teach Hidden Power to both of them. Diglett, I teach it over Scratch, and it is Hidden Power Fighting, which makes me extremely vulnerable to flying types, and I am unable to hit Levitating Ghosts. And I teach Hidden Power over Growl, and I get Hidden Power Ground, which is pretty good, but it's only 30 base power. So soon after, I teach Body Slam to Diglett over Hidden Power, and I go ahead and pick up this Swinub because it is holding the Never Melt Ice item, raising Ice type damage by 10%, and I run into another Wailmer. Hello, other Wailmer. Goodbye, other Wailmer. Anyway, I get the TM for Ice Beam, and I teach that right away over Hidden Power, and then I go into the battle against Annalise with a Quagsire and a Lantern, and because the Lantern has Shockwave, I think I should take it down first, but just to be safe I go for Astonish, hoping for a flinch, go for Magnitude, which happens to get Magnitude 9, which isn't enough to take down Lantern, surprisingly. So it is taken down by Astonish though. Out comes the Lunatone, Quagsire hits a Rock Tomb, making Wailord probably slower than the Lunatone now. I go for Body Slam into the Quagsire, taking it below half and paralyzing it. Water Pulse isn't quite enough to take down the Lunatone, and Ice Punch finishes off Diglett. So all that's left is the Wailord to fend off against the Shadow Waves and Fruity Pebbles. Okay, well that didn't go too great, but I do have Protect, which I teach over Astonish, and then I go back into the battle once again. This time going for Protect and Magnitude on the first turn. Magnitude 8 I know won't be enough to take down the Lantern, and unfortunately they both decide to double into Diglett, taking it down immediately, so eventually I'm taken down as well. So I decide to do just a little bit of training at Mount Battle. That way I can get the ranges a little better in my favor. Now it is always a gamble because Magnitude's damage is random, but hopefully if I can get lucky enough I should be able to take down Lantern in a single hit. Unfortunately I just get Magnitude 7, which gets a crit on Wailord, but Ice Beam does take down the Quagsire, and that's because I don't really want to be slower than the Lunatone. With the extra levels as well, Wailord should be able to take down the Lunatone in a single hit, which it doesn't. Okay, well that's very unfortunate. Fruity Pebbles rain down. Luckily Diglett is underground so it doesn't get hit by those, and Dig does finish off the Lantern. I'm faster than the Lunatone so I can take it down with Water Pulse, and then brings out his Cast Form and Matang. Because the Fruity Pebbles are coming down, both are very dangerous, Weather Ball from Cast Form, and Matang having Thunder Punch. Now Ice Beam isn't quite enough to finish off the Cast Form, and Thunder Punch does do a bit of damage to Wailord. Fruity Pebbles rain down, Cast Form is taken very low now. Diglett hits Matang with Dig, taking it down below half, and Water Pulse finishes it off, and then all that's left is the Cast Form, which between the two can't finish them both off, even with Icy Wind being super effective against Diglett. So I'm able to take it down and beat Snaddle on the third attempt. Moving right along to the battle against Gonzap, he leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and because the Nuzleaf always goes for Fake Out on the first turn, I go for Protect with Wailord, and go for Magnitude, which happens to get a Magnitude 7, not quite enough to take down Electrode. And because I know Wailord is slower and Magnitude should take down Electrode, I go for Magnitude to finish off the Electrode, which then brings out his Vileplume, which Ice Beam should take down in a single hit. It does. Unfortunately, Wailord is down to 23 HP, and Hyper Beam finishes it off. So all that's left is the Diglett, who finishes off the Nuzleaf. Great job, little guy. Which brings out Skarmory, and Water Pulse finishes it off. So now on attempt number 3, and as you can see the start is exactly the same. Unfortunately, Nuzleaf actually does get the Fake Out on Diglett, but the big thing to note here is that when Electrode wants to attack Diglett, it uses Sonic Boom, which is just a much better move to be hit by rather than a Spark into Wailord. Unfortunately, Magnitude 9 did get a crit into Wailord, taking it down to half anyway. The Nuzleaf goes down. I go for Dig and Protect, and this is just to heal up Wailord and ensure that Diglett won't go down to a Water Pulse. Ice Beam to take down the Vileplume, and then out comes his final Pokemon once again, Skarmory. Water Pulse comes out, taking down Diglett, unfortunately. Go for Ice Beam into the Whiscash. Not enough to take it down, but it does freeze, which is incredibly helpful. Ice Beam again, just to finish it off. I don't want to risk it thawing and being a nuisance with Spark. So I go for Ice Beam, taking Skarmory down below half, and then all that's left is one more hit, and Gonzap goes down. At level 41, Diglett gets Earthquake, which I'm going to teach over Magnitude, and Wailord gets Water Spout, an incredibly strong water-type move that does damage based on the amount of HP you have. Anyway, moving on to the battle against Gorgon, he leads with a Lairon and a Celio. Now, I have made a terrible mistake. I go for Rollout, which I think is the correct move to do. However, Earthquake does double the damage when you're underground, and I just had Diglett take it for no reason. A second rollout does take out the Celio though. Out comes Ursaring. I go for Body Slam into the Slowking. Hopefully I could get a Paralysis. I don't. And because Ursaring is in the slot that I was using rollout into before, it ends up stopping the rollout, so I go for Water Spout, which is enough to take down the Ursaring. Slowking hits a Confusion, not really doing that much damage, but it does confuse Wailord. Go for another Water Spout, which isn't quite enough to take down Primeape because his HP is a bit lower. Another Confusion taking me down to 70. Go for Ice Beam, which luckily does go through the Confusion and takes down Primeape, bringing out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. But unfortunately at this point, I can't make it much further. I go for Protect, hoping to stall out another turn of Confusion and not get hit. But unfortunately the very next turn I hit myself and get taken down by Shadow Storm. I decide to teach Diglett Protect over Dig, and then I go into the battle once again. Now on attempt number 4, which is very unfortunate because you have to climb up the entire tower every time you want to retry this fight. But Diglett goes for Earthquake on the first turn, and that's because I know that Celio can't two-shot the Diglett with its own Earthquake, and with another Body Slam I can take the Celio low enough to where a Water Spout will finish it off, as well as the Lairon. He brings out his Ursaring and Slowking, which Earthquake does a decent amount of damage to Slowking. Unfortunately, Diglett does go down to its Earthquake. I think it's a range though. Unfortunately, without a crit, Ursaring does survive the Water Spout, doing a little bit of damage. But luckily this time I don't get confused by the Slowking, go for Protect to heal up a turn, before going for Ice Beam to finish off the Ursaring. And then he brings out his Shadow Primeape. Now I don't really have a good answer for this because I know it can do a ton of damage with its Shadow Rush, but for some reason it's going for Shadow Storm, which I think I take better than Shadow Rush because Primeape has a lower special attack stat. Anyway, a crit from Ice Beam does take it down in a single hit though, bringing out his final Pokemon, which is the Shadow Hypno once again. Unfortunately, I don't have a partner Pokemon to lower the amount of damage that Shadow Storm is going to do, so I need to take it down as quick as possible, and another critical hit! Okay, well that's very nice. It looks to have been a 3-shot, so I'm not sure if I could have taken those extra turns to take it down. So I think that just won me the fight. Go for Ice Beam to take it down with another critical hit? Okay, Wailord, calm down. Anyway, all that's left is the Slowking, which unless I get confused, I'm absolutely safe. Go for Ice Beam, not quite enough to finish it off. And no confusion, so I finish it off with one last Ice Beam and beat Gorgon. Anyway, moving on to the last area of the game, and this pairing of Pokemon is doing fairly well, but I do think that Cidardark Isle is going to be a bit of a challenge for these two, so let's see how they do. With the first battle being a rematch against Lavrina, she leads with a Gorbis and a Gardevoir, and I go for Protect on the first turn and Water Spout, which does over half to Gardevoir, and Gorbis goes for Confusion, not confusing me though. I go for Protect and Earthquake to finish off the other two, and then out comes the Roselia and the Shadow Farfetch'd. Now, both of them are problematic in their own rights, however the Shadow Farfetch'd has a move called Shadow Panic, which causes confusion 60% of the time and is a spread move, so it is definitely the more annoying Pokemon. And then she brings out her last Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. Now Roselia decides to use Leech Seed on Wailord, which means that Roselia is going to be getting a ton of HP every turn, because Wailord has just such a high HP stat. Magic Leaf doesn't do that much damage, and Leech Life nearly brings Roselia up to half health before getting taken down by Body Slam. Now at level 49, Diglett gets Fissure, a one-hit KO move that is 30% accurate. And while I would consider it, I've already gone down the rabbit hole of one-hit KO moves, and I really don't want to do it again. And on top of that, it's a ground type move, so it doesn't hit flying types anyway, so it's not nearly as good. So I decide not to learn it. I run into another Wailord. Hello, other Wailord. Goodbye, other Wailord. And then I go on to the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Matang and a Quagsire. I go for Body Slam, paralyzing the Quagsire, but then I go for Water Spout, which ends up healing Quagsire. I think I was just so focused on trying to take down the Matang, I didn't really think about the Quagsire. Anyway, I will go for Ice Beam into the Quagsire now, and another Body Slam to finish off the Matang. Then out comes Scizor. Ice Beam takes Quagsire down fairly low. Another Mud Shot lowers both of our speeds, so we're more than likely slower than his final Pokemon. We're able to take down the Quagsire with another Body Slam. Then out comes Solrock. Scizor uses Silver Wind, taking Diglett down. Go for Water Spout, taking Scizor down low, but taking Solrock out. Then out comes Castform. Now Castform is a bit of a threat because it has Thunderbolt, so I do want to get up as much health as I can. Unfortunately, I am slower, and it gets a crit. Water Pulse is enough to take down the Scizor though, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Shadow Starmie. And unfortunately, I am much slower than it, and I'll have to take the Shadow Storm from Starmie and the Thunderbolt from Castform, which Wailord cannot do. Anyway, going into the battle once again, this is now attempt number 4, and I have decided not to use Water Spout on the first turn. Instead, Earthquake takes down the Matang and does half damage to Quagsire. And even though I would like to not use Water Spout to heal up the Quagsire, I do need to start dealing a ton of damage to the Scizor, because I really don't want it around later in the fight. Go for Body Slam, which does take Quagsire down to half, and Ice Beam finishes off. Out comes Solrock once again, and because I know Water Spout will take them both down, I don't need to worry about that. Diglett survives on 2 HP from a Silver Wind. I go for Body Slam to take down the Scizor, and then out comes Castform. Water Spout does quite a bit of damage to it, taking down Solrock, and then out comes Starmie. Now I do need to get a little lucky here, I think, because Starmie is just too powerful, so I decide to go for Sand Attack, hoping that it just misses, which it does. Go for Rollout, which takes down the Castform, and then I need to Protect, just so I don't get taken down. Another miss. Okay, go for Body Slam, which does respectable damage, and I think puts it in range for Rollout to finish it off, which it does, and I beat Snaddle on the 4th attempt. Okay, well, it's not great, but we move on to Ardos, who leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam. Go for Protect on the first turn. Swallow does actually outspeed Diglett and takes it down in a single hit. Okay, well, that's not great. Thunder Punch does quite a bit of damage to Wailord. Go for Water Spout, which doesn't take Swallow down to half and only does half to Alakazam. Fruity Pebbles rain down. Go for Protect, and Swallow goes for Shadow half like I predicted it might. And then I can now take down the Alakazam, but I know I'm going to hit the hit again, taking me down to 45 HP, which in hindsight I really shouldn't have used Water Spout because there's a chance Alakazam could have survived. But with such low HP, Wailord will go down, and so I need to try again. And surprisingly, this is only the 2nd attempt, and that's because Swallow decided to use Shadow half on the first turn, doing quite a lot of damage to Wailord, but honestly Wailord has the HP to expend, so it's fine. Swallow goes down to Ice Beam. Now the Alakazam is still alive, which isn't great. I don't really want him here, but luckily Diglett does outspeed, taking down the Alakazam and bringing in Heracross. Go for Ice Beam, which does over half to Heracross, and it looks like Kingdra's just going for Double Edge, which is better than it going for Hydro Pump into Diglett. I'm able to take down the Heracross. There's the Hydro Pump, and because the Electabuzz is out, I decided to go for Protect and Earthquake because I know I outspeed these two, which it does respectable damage to Kingdra and takes down the Electabuzz as I thought, and then he brings out his Shadow Snorlax. Another Double Edge from Kingdra. Luckily it doesn't take down the Diglett. Go for Sand Attack into Snorlax because it is using a 60% accurate move. Finish off the Kingdra with Ice Beam. Unfortunately it does hit, taking Wailord down to 5 HP. Okay, well this is quite dangerous. Go for Body Slam and Ice Beam, which gets a crit and takes him down. Okay, we take those. Anyway, moving on to Gorgon. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring, and Ursaring goes for Protect on the first turn, which is why I'm going to double into the Slowking. And because Water Pulse is just such a strong move, I decided that it's probably the best thing to hit the Slow King with anyway. Go for another Body Slam, taking it down very low. Go for another Water Spout, taking it down, and dealing damage to Ursaring, nearly taking it out. Out comes Aggron, slash into Wailord, does quite a bit of damage, but I should have more than enough HP to take down the Aggron. I finish off the Ursaring with a Body Slam, then out comes Walrein. Aggron goes down to a Water Spout, and Walrein takes very little from it. Then he brings out Poliwrath, and this is honestly the hardest wall to overcome in this fight, because Poliwrath and Walrein are both fairly tanky, and unfortunately Rollout is my best move to take down Walrein, but it takes time to set up, and Diglett doesn't really have that time. Another Rollout nearly finishes it off, leaves it with a Sliver, but its own Double Edge finishes it off, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime. Now, Mr. Mime definitely isn't a threat because it is incredibly physically frail, and it doesn't have that high of an HP stat, so it definitely goes down to a single Rollout. Except it doesn't. It actually survives with a decent amount of health, and I go down to the two of them using Shadow Storm. So I go back into the battle again. This is now the fourth attempt. Now, luckily this is the easiest fight to get to, so it's not all that much of a hassle to do. And as you can see, I've decided to start using Ice Beam instead of Water Spout, and that's because Ice Beam always has that chance to freeze, which is just better than Water Spout, and it does nearly the same amount of damage. Unfortunately, because of that crit, I do take down Slow King quicker than I expect, and Aggron comes out. I go for Sand Attack just in case the Ursaring decides to attack, and Water Spout does take it down to yellow. Out comes Walrein. It hits, but luckily doesn't get a crit. And just as before, I do need to start my rollout into Walrein. That way I can take it down efficiently and also deal a ton of damage to Mr. Mime, because I guess it's still not a one-shot. Go for Body Slam and Rollout, which takes it down to half. Earthquake does quite a bit to Diglett, so it will probably go down soon. I decide to take down the Ursaring now, which brings out the Poliwrath. Now Poliwrath might try to take down Diglett this turn, or it will set up Shadow Sky. Usually it'll set up Shadow Sky, but I think if it sees the KO, it's going to go for it. Mr. Mime uses Shadow Storm, dealing quite a bit of damage to Wailord, but I'm not quite able to take it down, and the Poliwrath did actually try to attack Diglett. Because I outspeed the Mr. Mime, I am able to take it down, and on a fourth rollout, it does nearly half. Diglett goes down, but one last rollout finishes off the Poliwrath, and we beat Gorgon. Moving on, I find a Shadow Dugtrio. Hello Dugtrio, goodbye Dugtrio, and I move on to the battle against Eldest. He leads with a Magnetrick and a Ninjask, and I go for Ice Beam and Earthquake on the first turn. That's because I want to take down the... Whoa! You can actually see the top of the lines. That's really cool. Anyway, what I was trying to say was I go for Earthquake and Ice Beam, and that's because I want to take down the Salamence on the following turn without having to protect and risk being outsped by it. Then out comes the Flygon. I go for Protect, and unfortunately the Ninjask goes for Silver Wind into the Wailord instead. Ice Beam finishes off Flygon, then out comes Marowak, and at this point I think that a single Water Spout should take them both down. Silver Wind hits Diglett, taking it down from over half. Water Spout isn't quite enough to finish off Ninjask. Out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras, and unfortunately, while I do have Rollout, I do think it's going to be a bit of a struggle to actually take it down, because it's only doing about an eighth. So I'll need to use Rollout at least 4 times, or get a lucky crit. Second Rollout doesn't get a crit, doesn't do that much damage, and Shadow Storm finishes me off. Okay, well, back into the battle again, and this time Diglett isn't taken down right as the Marowak comes in. I go for Body Slam, and while the paralysis isn't necessary, I am able to take them both down with Water Spout, which brings out his final Pokemon once again, which is Shadow Lapras. And because the Fruity Pebbles aren't up, I can safely go for Sand Attack here, just to lower the accuracy. And Rollout still isn't doing that much damage. Shadow Sky comes out, and now we hope for good luck. I Protect on the second turn as to not get hit by the Shadow Storm coming, which I'm glad I did, because I might have actually gotten hit by it. And after that, I go for another Sand Attack. And it's partially to keep Diglett alive, but also Wailord does take quite a bit of damage from the Shadow Storm anyway, and if Diglett does go down, Shadow Storm's going to be doing a ton of damage. Rollout takes it down below half, and Shadow Storm hits, taking Wailord down to 60. And at this point, I think it's safe to go on the offensive, go for Body Slam, dealing almost no damage actually. But Eldis is beaten, and we move on to the big box legendary, Shadow Lugia. And while I don't think it's that much of a threat for Wailord, it absolutely takes down Diglett in a single hit. Body Slam doesn't get a paralysis, does decent amount of damage to Wailord. Water Spout does an okay amount of damage. I go for Ice Beam now that my health is down. Shadow Blast hits, taking Diglett down in a single hit. Ice Beam takes it down to red, and then all that's left is one last hit. Shadow Storm takes me down to 93, but I'm able to take it down and move on to the final battle against Greevil. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and a Moltres, and I go for Water Spout on the first turn, taking Rhydon down, but at this amount of health, I'm not able to take down the Moltres. I decide not to get Hydro Pump because it just seems like a worse Water Spout, and Wailord goes down. Okay, well, seeing as this next fight is about 5 minutes long, I'm just going to go over what really matters. Water Spout at full health does take down both of them, and Wailord also outspeeds Moltres, meaning that there's a good chance it can outspeed Articuno as well. Now the next question is, can Diglett actually outspeed Tauros, which it also can. Now the next thing to check is how much Water Spout does, and it doesn't quite take down Tauros in a single hit. However, I think with just a few levels it will. And Wailord also outspeeds Articuno, but doesn't do that much damage to it. So eventually I get taken down, but I decide to go over to the Tutor Lady and pick up the move Swagger. Because I know I outspeed them, I can confuse them, and then because all three of the birds are special attackers, I don't even need to worry about the attack stat being an issue. But anyway, on attempt number 7 now, after using up all my rare candies, I go back into the battle again, and once again I'm able to take down the lead Pokemon with Water Spout, and out comes the Tauros and Exeggutor. I go for Sand Attack to make Exeggutor just less accurate. Tauros sets up Shadow Sky, go for the Water Spout again, which unfortunately even at level 66 isn't enough to take it down. But I think that with enough rollouts, I will be able to take down Articuno. I go for another Sand Attack, just so the Exeggutor can't hit that often, and rollout finishes off Tauros, and because I know I outspeed the Articuno, all I need to do is get a little bit lucky, because even at 60 base power, 4 times effective rollout, Articuno still isn't a one-shot, so I decide to Swagger on this turn, hoping that it hits itself. Unfortunately it doesn't, and takes down Diglett immediately, which means that my plans for trying to use it against Zapdos are unfortunately gone, but rollout should still do quite a bit of damage anyway, and so unfortunately I am slower than the Zapdos, and it does about half of my HP, so I am relying on... Oh, Zapdos actually just went down in a single hit, and Exeggutor goes down to a critical hit. So with that, we beat the game, but how well did they do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 11 hours, 37 minutes, and 34 seconds, with Wailord being level 66 and Diglett being level 60. And throughout the game, they lost 24 times, 20 of those being to bosses, and 4 of those being to random trainers. Now, because this whole video's premise is the largest and the smallest, unfortunately Diglett does suffer, because it is just not as useful at the end of the game, due to its frailty and overall just lack of power. But it still does have that speed stat that does come in handy, which is why it is in the B+ tier. Now, I do think that this pairing is actually beneficial for both Pokemon. With Diglett being faster than most electric types, it can quickly take them down, thus helping Wailord survive longer. And likewise, Wailord gets access to Ice Beam and at least decent type coverage to deal with a lot of the flying types that Diglett really has no way of dealing with. But on the other hand, there are a lot of downsides to this pairing. Now, obviously, Diglett is always a liability because it is just incredibly frail, and at 55 attack, it's not even hitting that hard either. Whereas Wailord really has to take a lot of the pressure off of Diglett, which sometimes just comes down to luck on whether or not the opponent wants to attack Diglett or Wailord. And on top of that, Wailord's speed tier is just not that great, only 60 base speed really hurts it. And on top of that, while the move pool is pretty decent, it is just run-of-the-mill water type. So water, ice, and some other type coverage in there. In this case, rollout and earthquake, which in this case, earthquake is definitely better for Diglett, and rollout is just too good to pass up. But anyway, with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!